The purpose of the Global CFO Council is to provide an educational and networking forum for senior financial executives in order to share best practices, discuss current financial issues, and to learn about current topics related to the performance of their jobs. Membership is open to senior financial executives including CFOs, financial VPs, and treasurers. We hope that you'll become a member of the Global CFO Council today. To join, please visit the membership tab at globalcfocouncil.com.
Bill is our awesome partner in crime in this. Bill's a senior vice president with Bank of America, a long time, a friend of the Charleston CFO Council and of the Global CFO Council, and long career in banking. Been to a bunch of different awesome banks. I think started off as a stockbroker, and before that was a flight engineer with the Navy. 1,000 flight hours with 4 different aircrafts. And in training, which I think is appropriate before joining the Navy and serving our country, served as Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse at Disneyland back in the 80s. Then at Ole Miss, and now here with us here in January in the frigid cold. So, Bill, thank you very much.
I appreciate it, Robert. And I will, after I do my little intro, I will mute. I'm at home today, obviously, with the weather, and I have 3 corgis, so they are going to be they're just awful. So I don't want to hear any. You guys don't want to hear the barking of these dogs. But at Bank of America, I figured the last thing anyone on the CFO Council wanted to hear was 60 minutes about commercial lending or commercial banking. But I think what separates myself and Bank of America is our ability to work with outside business partners as well as internal business partners. So that's why I invited ADP to come on and do this tax credit presentation. I think that from a banking standpoint and a relationship standpoint, bankers that have the ability to reach out outside of their initial organization and bring quality people in to help a relationship is extremely important. So I'm looking forward to Lynn and Maggie doing their presentation. I've heard it before and it is fantastic. So hope everyone enjoys the content today. Thank you for letting us sponsor this, Robert. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Bill. Maggie and Lynn, man, the bar has been set pretty high. I expect excellence this morning. Maggie is a corporate sales manager with ADP, UGA grad, I think from Ohio, but lived a stint, Ohio now, but lived a stint in great state of Georgia. And Maggie, if I think this is correct, big super volunteer in the Pitbull community running a Pitbull rehabilitation center. Is that correct?
That is correct. Got started when I was in college, and now I have 3 beautiful, absolute big babies at home, and 3 boys, Milo, Jax, and Huck, and they are the light of my life.
Lynn, tax credit manager with ADP. I think you're from Ohio, now living in Raleigh, North Carolina. Before ADP, it looked like you did a stint at Tar Heel Publishing, a good North Carolina boy. I think that was telephone directories, which I don't think is probably really doing very well right now. So smart switch over to ADP. And it looked like something interesting I found out about you, a little bit of rugby playing. I think you recently got married, and then a marathon runner. And you're a little faster than me, so I'm not going to share any of your times.
Times are clocked with a sundial, so I'm not faster than anybody, but pleasure to be here today, and thanks for the nice intro. Bill has raised the bar for us, so hopefully we live up to it.
I'm going to mute myself, and looking forward very much to your presentation and hitting you with some Q&A in the middle.
All right, thanks, Robert, and welcome, group. Maggie and I are very happy to be here today, and hopefully you all find some value in the content that we'll share over the next 40 minutes or so. As mentioned, I believe there's going to be a Q&A session about halfway through and at the end. So I encourage everybody, grab your pen and paper, jot them down, and then post them in the chat. And then Robert's going to be kind of playing the MC for us to make sure that we address as many as we can today. So just a little bit about, we just got a nice, awesome introduction. So we don't need to go through any more of mine and Maggie's resume here, but we will be leading the charge for you today as far as tax credits are concerned. But just so you know a little bit about our background, where we're coming from at ADP, I believe that ADP is well recognized in the business community. A lot of people already know us and love us for our payroll and HR side of things. But under the tyranny of such a good brand there, a lot of people don't know that we actually have a tax practice that's very substantial. It's actually been in practice going on 50 years. There's over 400 folks on our tax team right now. It's our in-house tax team. And just since 2017, since we really kind of put kerosene on this tax credit we're about to talk about today, we've actually recovered $6 billion for our tax credit clients across the country. So we're very excited to maybe show you all how you might be able to take advantage of some of these programs as well. And here's a sad fact as we get into the tax credits. Specifically the R&D, where I'll keep my focus today, then Maggie will talk about some other business incentive credits that are out there. But specific to the R&D, a lot of people aren't aware that Uncle Sam has $30 billion in a pool set aside, earmarked to spend every single year on the R&D tax credit. The federal tax program, and then some states have their own individual one. Sadly, only about 1 in 3 businesses that are actually eligible for this credit are actually taking advantage of it and getting their slice of this $30 billion pie. And before we talk about the reasons why that is true, I think it's appropriate to lay some groundwork to talk about the federal R&D tax credit. First of all, unlike the ERC, which some of you may have had some experience with, some good, some bad, some certainly we've heard about it in the news, which that was kind of like a credit program out of necessity. The federal R&D tax credit program is a permanent tax. It is made so in 2015. The really nice thing about in 2015, especially for the small and mid-sized business market, is it opened it up, loosened the restriction, loosened some of the documentation requirements, and really made it available to all. It's monetized in 2 different ways. So for most companies that we meet with, people that have been in business longer than 5 years, that are profitable, this federal tax credit is monetized by doing it as a dollar for dollar offset against the federal tax liability for the company, unless it's a pass-through entity, and then it flows down to the ownership base. The second way it can be monetized, however, is for companies that are in the beginning or early stages of their company, yet they've not reached any type of profitability, or they're not revenue generating quite yet. As long as you're within 5 years of your first dollar earned and you're less than $5 million in annual gross receipts, you're actually able to take it as an offset against the employer portion of your FICA taxes. So the Social Security and the Medicare that you all as business owners are matching for your employees, if you're in that 5 years of revenue, first 5 years of revenue, less $5 million in gross receipts, you can actually receive essentially a rebate, a cashback rebate from Uncle Sam for the FICA taxes that you had paid. So those are the 2 ways that we monetize this. Now, sounds very attractive now, right? Now, I think we're probably getting some ears perked up, like, tell me more about this. But here's the hurdles and barriers on why people haven't taken advantage of it before. A lot of folks think that their activities aren't innovative or groundbreaking. They're thinking R&D means white lab coats, or very technical, like sitting at a desk and we're doing computer programming, coding, and language writing, or we're working on some sort of drug or medication that's new to the market. And certainly all those are going to qualify for R&D, and those are like more the obvious fits. But more and more and more, we find that more companies are involved in R&D in some capacity, and we'll talk a little bit more about that down the line here as we get more into some examples, specific examples. One thing you need to know about the R&D credit is it's an activities-based credit. So what folks in my seat, in Maggie's seat, and others on our team do is we talk to business owners about the activities and what activities are you doing. The qualifying activity, they're generally, Uncle Sam defines it, anything that meets the 4-part test, which we'll touch on in just a second, could qualify for the R&D tax credits. But basically, if you're improving or creating a product, a manufacturing process, inventing something, perfecting or developing some sort of new technique, software, or formula, you generally have a qualifying activity. Again, not industry specific, but the industries that we see, like our heaviest hitters, and ones that those happen most commonly, are in the software and tech field, the manufacturing field. Coincidentally, in North and South Carolina, that's the highest claimed utilization of the credit is through the manufacturing. And it's about 60% nationwide is manufacturing. Biotechnology, pharmaceutical, and engineering are the heaviest industries utilizing the credit. So just really quick, we'll take a little bit deeper dive into the three of the heavier hitting industries. So software activities include the development, design, or improvement of mobile applications. Are you working on software as a service? Are you building out a video game, a cloud-based application, legacy applications? AI is like popping up. I mean, I have 2 conversations about AI every single day. These are people that are making software for sale, lease, or license. Like they're selling their products to the general public or to businesses. Where we've really seen a spurt, and I'm sure Maggie would agree, is actually that nowadays companies are actually in developing their own internal software to improve their business functions. So that software that helps facilitate their service. A very common and odd example, one of my colleagues ran across here recently, it was a family-owned pest control business, but they developed a scheduling and map routing software that tied into their invoicing system. And they wrote all of it. They went outside. They funded it. They got the research done. So, you know, they're a pest control. You'd think first glance, no R&D here, except for internally they developed this own software to improve their business function. Online marketplace, people working on specializing in their online marketplace, marketing analysis software. Where's our business coming from and how are we tracking it and how are we retaining those clients and reaching out to those clients? So any of these softwares or apps that are developed in-house to improve the business function would also qualify under provisions of R&D. When we look at manufacturing, are you developing or building product prototypes, working on chemical formulations, doing the custom fabrication? Are we spending time retooling, die casting, molding as we get into that prototyping process? Do we have expenses related to first article or design runs? You know, how many iterations do we go through of widget A until we can actually take widget A to market? And we can't recoup the cost of all the materials and the time that went into that without this R&D credit. With the R&D credit, it would allow you to do that, so forth. We also talk to companies about manufacturing process improvements. So are we increasing automation? Huge these days. There's a lot of mom and pop manufacturing shops that are switching all the way over their systems right now. Are we working on improving our efficiency, our accuracy? Reducing waste, going green is a giant initiative for a lot of companies out there. So if you are spending capital, be it dollars, intellectual capital, or your time as capital, those are all quantifiable and qualifiable expenses underneath of the R&D tax credit. So again, you don't have to be in one of these specific industries to have these expenses.
And Lynn, if I can jump in really quickly, in the manufacturing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, in the manufacturing space, by nature of ADP and who we are, we have a lot of data at our fingertips as it relates to some of our specific industries. And one of the trends that we're seeing in manufacturing specifically is as there has been a little bit of a war on talent, and we're seeing some of the decline in available or technical workforce, many of our manufacturers are being forced into becoming a little bit more innovative in their processes. So as we're thinking about this, and as you're thinking about maybe your own organization, thinking about the changes that you've made in order to respond to some of the changes in the workforce, in the economy, to become more efficient, to improve the level of quality, or really focus on your quality control automation. These are all spaces where if we've had to become innovative, regardless if it is directly related to the products that are either being distributed or produced, but if we're truly looking at the processes that are being put in place and you've become innovative as a result of responding to the market, that is certainly an area that should be up for consideration in the manufacturing space. So wanted to make sure that was just reiterated.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Great ad, good value. And then pivot here into the biotech and pharmaceutical space, which obviously seems like a more natural where people's brain go to when they think about art, research, and development. But it's related to medical devices. There are people making leaps and bounds and giant strides in the medical device field right now, both with prosthetics and robotics, and then artificial organs. It's crazy. It's off the map of what people can consider and think about. But therapeutics, drug applications, wearables, monitoring devices, implants, prosthetics, we mentioned. And then to employ and create all these things, you have to have some specific processes, right? And what's being used: scientific methods, robotics, AI, manufacturing, techniques. Techniques is a little bit harder one to get approved. There's a little bit more documentation goes into that. But we have seen where surgeons have come up with new surgical techniques or therapy techniques, testing techniques, and those can all be approved or included into R&D studies. Software. Maggie and I had a conversation yesterday about a recent client of mine. He's actually a cosmetic surgeon, and I was referred into him. And I said, I'll take the meeting as a courtesy to the account that referred me, but I just don't know how we're going to get a plastic surgeon or a cosmetic surgeon approved for an R&D tax credit, except to find out he's on his own, outside of his own practice, building out this app where you use your iPhone or your Android device, and you could take some sort of body composition scanning analysis, and then based on the analysis that you get through the scan, it starts to show the patient expected outcomes through that interaction. So it's like a window that goes both ways of current and then hopeful results. And so it was very interesting, all the data and the work and research that went into that, and how we were able to get them qualified for the R&D tax credit for someone that generally wouldn't qualify. And then, of course, if you're inventing anything, if you've got any patentable activities, Maggie and I's ears perk up when we hear patent, or we see on someone's website, hey, we got a patent pending or a patented process. We're like, hey, this is like a home run for R&D tax credits, and it's worth a conversation. So now that we've talked about the activities, the next step is we look at expenses. All right, for sure you're creating something, you've got activities related to that, but another component is, do we have expenses? Do we have some spend? Do we have some capital invested, some money invested? So the first of those, and the biggest factor, is wages. The wages paid to the people doing the work, the talent that is working on the product. But it's not only the talent working on the project, but also anybody that's managing in that process, a project manager, someone that they report to and keeps the timelines going. If they're touching that project from that regard also, then their wages are also included, or a portion of the wages are also included in. Really interesting fact, if someone sits and spends about 80% of their time in those R&D buckets, we can actually round it up. Uncle Sam allows for a round up to 100% of the wages are considered, and they're put into that quantifiable dollar assessment that we deliver at the end here. Next door over, Maggie mentioned the manufacturing world, and people are doing different things and things more efficiently. We see a lot of companies right now that are going, we are really great at our part. We're going to outsource some of this work to and what we call contract research. And if that's involved in the development of the end product or end result that we're hoping to achieve, then that contract research or that contract work can also be included into the equation, and it feeds into that dollar amount that ultimately ends up being that tax credit. Supply costs are included in there. That's a big one in the manufacturing world. Again, my example, we're working on our widget. We burn through a ton of material that we can't recoup the costs for any other way except for the R&D tax credit is a way to do that. And then hopping over to the app development, the software development world, cloud computing is definitely a cost, and it's on the rise for all of these companies. So that would be one factor that we would also consider. We take all four of these. I always joke, I call it our R&D blender. We throw it in the R&D blender, we press go, and we come up and then we deliver and go, hey, here's an estimated credit. Here's what you can hope to achieve and receive from the R&D credit program. So we've got activities. We've got expenses. Now we just determine the eligibility. We put the two of those together, and we determine eligibility through what is basically the gospel for Uncle Sam, the 4-part test. So the first qualification, does it fit a permitted purpose? Are we improving functionality, performance, reliability, or quality of our product, process, software, formula, technique, invention, or the like? Is that work technological in nature? Are we employing the sciences? Is it physical, biological, engineering, and/or computer science? STEM is a big phrase that's out there in the world: science, technology, engineering, manufacturing. If it's touching one of these sciences, most likely we're going to get it approved because it's technological in nature. First two are easy gates to cross. The third and fourth kind of go hand in hand. Again, not difficult to cross, but this is where the rubber sort of meets the road. Do we have some form of uncertainty? So an example of not being uncertain is like a furniture manufacturer makes a chair, and then they just change the color of it. Well, there's not going to be any uncertainty, right? They've been making chairs. You're still making a chair at the end of the day, so that's not going to do anything different. So there wouldn't be any uncertainty there. But do we have uncertainty around capability, method, and/or design? So same example, if we're making a chair, but now we're using some sort of composite material, we're not sure if the frame can support how much weight, and we have to measure that, and then how long, what's the life cycle of this material. Well, that would take that making a chair example into, yes, that would fit into R&D. So is there elimination of uncertainty? And then how do we eliminate uncertainty? Well, we've got to experiment. We got to model, we got to simulate, we got to trial and error it, we got to conceptualize it. So there's your 4-part test. So if we have activities, we have expenses, and we pass through these 4-part test or this 4-part lens, then absolutely you would qualify for the R&D tax credit. Now, there is one little extra component here. It's not the 5-part test, it's really a 4-part test. But back to this elimination of uncertainty, there has to be some sort of financial risk. Uncle Sam wants to see the overarching theme here is, do we have financial risk? Do we have a stake in the game? And do you own the intellectual property? So as long as you retain rights or some portion other of your product, your process, your software, your technique, it's yours to sell, it's yours to market, license, lease to others, then you qualify all the way across the board and it would qualify for the R&D tax credit. So now for the exciting part, these are real dollars. I'm kind of going to tie us up here on the R&D tax credit before handing off for questions and then to Maggie. But here's some real world examples over the last 12 months from my colleagues and I. Here's a relatively small 22 employee software development company in Ohio, tax credit of $169,000. Here's an even smaller company, just 10 employees, working a manufacturer in plant-based chemical world, $56,000 credit. A small software, 10 employees, $38,000 in credit. And then here's the big home run. Here's the dream scenario: an aerospace and engineering firm down in Florida, 37 employees, a $736,000 credit. So, you know, to me, all of these are substantial and can go towards the bottom line and allow you to use the credit as intended to take this capital, reclaim it, retain it, reinvest it in your people, your process, and your products, ultimately for your success. So with that, I will conclude the R&D portion and see if we've got any a question or two before we hand off to Maggie.
Yeah, I do, Lynn, and I'm gonna reclaim host for just a second, and then you'll
Sure.
have to claim it again when we're done with the questions. But first question is around that 4-part test and documentation. What's some best practices around the paperwork and the documentation to justify that you have in fact passed that 4-part test? It may be wages as an example, time cards. What's best practice about putting a package together and having documentation to prove that you passed that?
Great question. So as mentioned, in 2015, Uncle Sam kind of loosened the restriction. Next year, they might tighten it up just a bit, but especially for the small to mid-sized market, verbal testimony is allowable as long as it's reasonable. And that's sort of like a double-edged sword. What does that mean? Is Uncle Sam going to come and get me? So I'll just let you know that we're fairly conservative in our estimate, and then we try and dive a little bit deeper. So fair and reasonable would mean if you've got somebody like an admin worker that sits at the front desk of the factory and she's answering the phone calls and she's receiving packages and just doing light administrative work, you'd be hard pressed to say 80% of her wages should go into the R&D study, right? There's no linear or logical path. But at the same time, if you've got an engineer that is on the floor and he's only developing and he's constantly designing new products, it would be very easy to say that, 80, 90%, even 100% of his salary would go into there. So that's kind of what our team works with and goes say, hey, we have to have a linear, logical, reasonable path. Payroll records, of course, are great and easy. That's how ADP candidly got into the business. Is like, hey, we've got payroll data. We can take payroll data and turn it into a tax credit for you. Time cards go to that. If you've got some people document very, very, down to on a very tight process, and then some in the small to mid-sized business market are so busy running the day and trying to hit the bottom line that they don't document as much. And that's why Uncle Sam's kind of open to that reasonable, fair and reasonable definition. So it's always more information is better than less, but it doesn't mean that you have to consider yourself disqualified because you don't have documentation down to the second or down to the penny.
Question number 2 is around maybe some common things that don't apply. Maybe things that get brought up like, oh, hey, what about this that maybe you'd think would apply and then they don't, or it's a hot button issue for the IRS and under audit, it gets a lot of scrutiny. Anything in that category that you'd point out?
Yeah. So if things are touching those industries, like you think it's kind of funny as you learn to do this job and you work with partners and educate, is like, I'll give you an example, a real world example. One of my small business partners brought me a company today. I can't remember the name of it, something Research Institute. So she was all excited. She goes, they're doing R&D. And for sure they are doing R&D, but they are doing R&D. They are paid and contracted by other groups or companies to do the R&D. So while they're doing the R&D, their research is totally funded, and that R&D or that IP belongs to the person that paid them. So my partner, she was understandably excited going, hey, this company's going to qualify for an R&D credit. I'm like, sadly, they don't, but can you talk to her about who their clients are? Because maybe that could be a position, they could well position themselves to their clients going, hey, we got a partner that can help out with this and maybe help out with your invoicing or billing. So one company's doing R&D, but who owns the rights to that R&D is really where it comes in. So that's like the grayest area. Maggie, you can add any color, but I think that's really, that's the most difficult thing people struggle with is like who owns it and who's doing the work.
Yeah, and I would like to add a little bit of color to that. So again, the IRS is going to define things a little bit differently than we might think that they logically should be. And so a couple of things that we also see, and one of the things that we really need to focus on is it technological in nature? We very often have organizations that say, yeah, we're changing things, but is it color? Is it taste? Is it some of these like less tangible things? And we really differentiate between what we call the hard and the soft sciences. So the hard sciences being biological, mathematics, engineering, as opposed to maybe some of the marketing or social sciences that we see. But I do think it's also really important to bring up some of the industries that we've seen historically really kind of toe some of that gray line. A lot of one thing that we saw recently was the dental industry, right? For a long time, people thought making the differences in certain crowns and certain moldings, every single client was different. Well, in reality, that process is very similar every time, but maybe the outcome of the product is a little bit different. And so that's when we really will work with our clients to drill down in this 4-part test. And then, of course, as Lynn mentioned, determining, do we have the ownership of the majority of intellectual property and are the majority of the financial risk taken. So again, we're going to always fall back on some of those IRS guidelines, but the technicality in nature of the work being done, I think, is where a lot of the focus should lie.
Any impact of a new administration? We just got a new president, I think yesterday, and anything from the that's come up during his speeches that might impact, let's, for this segment, keep it specific to R&D tax credit, maybe more expansion or takeaway from this? Has this ever come up during a stump speech?
It comes up, it's a big question because it's the news of the day, right? Now, we are hearing that, and we're very optimistic that, one, we believe it's going to stay. It's a permanent tax credit. There's not going to be any reduction. It's $30 billion out there right now. So we don't see any reduction. What we've heard is it's bipartisan supported, but both sides like the R&D tax credit. Both sides are in favor of the R&D tax credit. So there's no known danger or worry about this going away. There have been some recent restrictions in the past few years, and we don't want to get too technical in it right now, but on how it's claimed. But that said, That was a barrier for some, a very small segment, but we hear that's going away, and it should have gone away already, but neither side wanted to give the other a win through the last, contentious few months. So any barrier that might perceive in people's minds out there right now, we're happy to have that conversation and show you a way to handle that. But no, it's favorable in both sides. And just any recent barriers, because it's not the most important issue. It's not always tagged on to something. So it's not like you're going to go out there as a forefront. So the perceived restriction will be less than we're very optimistic about, but it's still out there and it's available. And the credit itself's never, ever gone away. So we don't want to give the perception the credit's ever gone away. That's a great question. One thing Maggie just said before I lose this train of thought, though, is sometimes people disqualify themselves because they think of the success of the project, and I can only get the R&D expense recouped on the success of a project. Just had a client the other day, software. They did 15 different programs last year. Only 3 of them they were able to take to market. They're still able to claim credit for the 12 that they did all the work on, even though those weren't successful launches. So didn't want people to disqualify thinking it has to be the success of the project.
I'm sure their CFO was happy that they're failing that much.
I had to temper the conversation going, I'm really sorry that you've dealt with that, but here's a little bit of good news. Here's a little gold nugget for you.
Robert, I'd like to add here, just for some of the organizations or some of the CFOs who might be joining this call, who may be a little bit closer to R&D already or have experienced work with it in the past. Some of the legislative review that Lynn is discussing right now was Section 174 that was put into place to start taking effect at the beginning of 2022. We have now since then been anticipating the reversal and the retrospective reversal of Section 174, which is essentially related to the amortization schedule of some of the deductions of the company that are related to R&D expenditures. This is part of the 100-day plan with some of the new political landscape that we're in. So it is something that we are very close to, that we are we're paying very close attention to, kind of through Eye on Washington and everything that's going on. So anybody who is looking for information or updates on what's happening with Section 174, we're happy to provide updates in color as they happen.
So that was my last question. I'm combining a few that I've gotten, but it was around, it seemed like a couple years ago that it changed, and it changed for the worse, and there was a much longer amortization period. And that's what you're saying may get reversed. It may go back to the old way, which is a little more generous of a tax credit.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say generous of a tax credit. It's more in the sense of the schedule that it takes. And so when the 5-year amortization schedule became required in 2022, realistically, for companies to kind of recoup what they were used to with the R&D credit, really it takes into year 3 or 4. Without getting too technical on what that schedule looks like or real life examples. So it really did change things significantly. I do want to say, there is a lot of outline that if some of this R&D activity is being done, it is a requirement to amortize whether or not you're taking the R&D credit. So I think there's a lot around there. One of the things that we didn't discuss at the beginning when it comes to utilization and how the credit is calculated, in light of this conversation, maybe there are some companies who passed up on taking the R&D credit over the last couple of years. We are expecting that to be, should it be overturned, we're expecting that to be overturned retroactively. But in addition to that, something that we talk to a lot of people about is they feel, I've missed out on this R&D credit for the last few years. And not only are we able to do, because it is activity based, it's going to be reflective of the activity that happened on that year's pertinent tax return. We are also able to go back 3 years, and should a company want to amend their tax returns to be able to claim the R&D credit, we certainly can do that. Of course, pending how legislative change happens, we'll see what type of caveats there may be to that, but we are anticipating to be able to go back and look all the way back to 2022 for those clients who maybe are feeling like they missed out or were given an unfair chance, pending legislature.
Like it. All right, I'm going to mute myself. I'm going to stop myself from asking you more questions. So Maggie, I'm going to yield the floor to you in your section and hit you rapid fire with the rest of the questions at the end.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Robert, and thank you, Lynn. So, as we all know, the great United States of America, we are in a we have a unique structure, and so what we've been talking about up until now is the federal R&D tax credit. As Lynn mentioned, there are going to be some states that mirror the R&D credit in certain capacities, and so the reason that we have some of these federal credits is because our federal government is putting that money aside to keep us ahead of the global market. And now what we're going to transition to is how our states are working, individually to keep each other competitive from one another. And so when we really think about tax credits and business incentives, we want to go back to, as Lynn mentioned, back in 2015, a lot changed for the R&D credit, which made it significantly more accessible. Most of the state credits and incentives kind of came about in the early 90s. And some of the reasons for that were, how we were truly working to boost some of the state economies and how to keep them competitive within one another. We all wonder why some of these really large, massive, national, international corporations decide, hey, I'm going to go put my plant in, this area of Georgia. And we're like, wow, that's a rural spot, or this area of South Carolina, or near a port, or maybe in Ohio. We all wonder why they made that decision. And this is a big part that plays into that. And so going back, one of the things that has happened in recent years is as our states, our departments of revenue, of community affairs, departments of economic development have recognized that these are have really been pointed towards some of these large enterprise organizations. Legislature has changed to make them more accessible, and so that precedent has kind of carried with us. And for a lot of our business owners, some of these credits feel like they're out of reach, or there's no way that they're going to apply, or maybe they're more work than they could be worth pursuing, or might put you at additional risk or scrutiny with the IRS. And so what we have worked really hard within our organization of compliance solutions at ADP is to help our clients identify their eligibility, see that they truly are relevant to the operations that are happening within their organization, that these things can be certified, that the regulatory compliance can be handled, and really show the significance of how they can impact the businesses on the financial side. And so, as we've been discussing, we really touched on the federal R&D credit, but I want to show just some of the scope of what our practice, as Lynn mentioned, we've been around almost 50 years now, but our practice touches on a lot. Some of these federal credits, like research and development and the work opportunity tax credits, but also have really focused on our state and local tax credits and incentives, transferable credits. There are a number of states that allow organizations to claim these credits, but may not have the utilization to take them. And so they're able to then, use a broker service in order to transfer, to sell those credits for cash, and then allow another organization to take them, buy them for a percentage or an amount on the dollar to take that respective deduction in their liability. And then, of course, there are going to be employment-based credits, and then some of the economic development services, which is directly related to some of those negotiated state incentives, as we kind of pit the states against each other and see them work to create the best scenario that they can to incentivize an organization to come to their state rather than maybe one of those neighboring states. And so, as I mentioned, a lot of these tax credits really came to the surface in the early 90s. And to be honest with us, as Lynn is talking about things that are concrete, really on the state side, we're going to have to focus a little bit more conceptually today, because we could spend 24 hours talking about all of the different programs that all of the states offer, because to be competitive, they have to differ from one another. So we're going to use South Carolina as kind of the landmark of the conversation today. But what I think is important to note, Georgia actually was the state that kind of was the pinnacle for this, has been considered the number one state for business incentives for over the last 10 years. And what a lot of other states did was they started to mirror some of those programs to to become more competitive. And so some of those programs you'll see here at the top are things like the job tax credit. Those are new creation of job credits, investment credits, training credits for our workforces, developmental credits, and ports credits. So I think a very important thing to note here is that, as I mentioned, we're going to see something different in every state. We also I think it's important to note that there are some states that are considered statutory credit and incentive states, and some that are not. So as you guys are thinking about this, and trying to evaluate and choosing a vendor to help you evaluate what might be available, it's also important to realize that there are the statutory states basically say that you are entitled to this credit should these activities happen inside of your organization. There are other states that offer that offer these credits on more of an applied for basis. So you have to apply with whether that's the Department of Revenue, Community Affairs, Department of Economic Development, or some conjunction of all of them. You have to apply. If we can go back, Lynn, we have to apply ahead of time before the activity happens. So it's important to know how your state stands in terms of making sure that we can actually pursue these credits and knowing what's going to be required of us to do so. So just to kind of touch on what these look like, again, our thresholds are going to be different for every state. Credits offered. And then, of course, how they can be utilized. But just to kind of think about what each of these are, job tax credits are going to be there. Some can be industry specific, some can be geographically and zone specific. But realistically, what this looks like is if you are growing your workforce, intend to grow your workforce, there may be credits available to you for every net new position that you're creating inside of your organization. The reason that these credits exist is because the departments of economic development are focused on decreasing the unemployment rate, increasing the average household income, and creating a stronger economy. And geographically, they even have to focus. You guys can imagine in some of the cities, there's probably less of a focus on boosting the economy as there may be in some of the more economically distressed areas. So those are all going to be incentivized slightly differently. We also have investment tax credits where if we are putting major amounts of capital, we're seeing additions to, CapEx additions to the fixed asset listings year over year. Maybe there are major investments that are going into a facility or into real estate or into land. These are areas that we may be able to capitalize on some of the credits from the state. I think we're all used to seeing some of those articles that come out that say X manufacturing facility is opening a brand new 100,000 square foot facility, expanding their operations, adding 10 additional lines. These are exactly the kinds of things that they're probably, or if they're not already looking to claim these, I'm hoping that they would seek counsel in helping them claim these, because big bet is that there's going to be something available to them. Job development and worker training credit. Any type of investment that's really going into increasing the skill sets of our workforce, or focusing on some type of technology change that's happening, maybe implementing a new ERP system for our manufacturers. Are we implementing some type of new quality control? Are we training our people on different CRMs, employee engagement strategies, anything that we're doing to boost the skill set and efficacy of our workforce? And then, of course, we've got our ports credits for some of our. There are inland ports, but then if we focus on, areas like Charleston and Savannah, some in Louisiana, some of those states that are going to have ports that are very pivotal in import-export activity, this is a credit that is very often ancillary or tacked on to a different credit that's available in the state, depending on how they maybe are increasing that import or export tonnage. So if we can then kind of go on, I want to talk about how this comes to fruition for an organization. So while it looks like, okay, we have all these things that we're identifying that, hey, we may be able to claim one of these credits, just showing this, and of course won't go through this entire screen, but while these credits are more accessible, they're certainly not easy. There's a lot of regulatory compliance that is required in order to take them. So if we look at this screen, we're seeing how are we identifying it? How are we tracking these things? That was a question that came up earlier, tracking time and wages. How are we keeping up to date with some of the compliance changes, determination or screening methods, preparation of necessary forms, application filing? Are we certifying different activities that are happening? How are we calculating it? And then, of course, what everybody's always concerned about, how are we ensuring that the reporting is done correctly? And then how do we protect ourselves from audit? So there's up to 30 plus action or tasks that would be required. And part of why this is more accessible is because a lot of our large enterprise organizations, you guys can imagine, they have dedicated people inside that sit in-house on their tax teams, on their finance teams, that there's somebody who does this all day long, right? They do this all day long, all year long. But for some of our smaller businesses, we don't necessarily have the resources to be able to allocate to this. So that's where some of these third parties like ADP and our compliance solutions are really able to assist and support taking our organizations. And when I say small businesses, that's a very fluid term, but taking them through this process and being able to protect them in the meantime. So whenever we're looking or an organization is looking for who they may want to work with, in terms of being able to produce or pursue one of these tax credits, these are some of the things that we would say are very important. Are looking for, are they willing to take you through a complimentary assessment? Are they willing to take you through an analysis of your organization and the operations to give you a fair ballpark dollar amount and assessment of fact patterns, activities, expenses, eligibility, all of that? What does the process of the full credit analysis truly look like? What are their what is the expertise of their practitioners? The qualitative and quantitative analysis. What are we reviewing in terms of true data and reporting? And then, of course, what is the analysis, credit delivery, and the after the fact look like? And when we say after the fact, are they going to be able to take on some of the government liaison work for you? Are they going to provide you with that necessary audit support? And so what truly, when you're working with a vendor, are they going to be amicable with working with your personal CPA? That's something that we find incredibly important, that there can be a synergistic partnership there. And we can imagine for all of you, you've have dedicated advisors that maybe you've worked with for a long time. And when seeking a partnership for a specific specialty credit, it's very important that everybody can work together there. So I think that from the state credit side, I know we had to think very conceptually here, but we would like to open it up to questions that may have arisen during the last few slides.
On that one right there, that last slide, I got a question. So my first CFO job, I worked at a small but really fast growing company, and we had a CPA firm that was awesome, but they were small and did personal taxes of the owner and the business taxes. And sometimes it can be kind of contentious, the relationship between tax credit specialists and a focused small CPA firm. And so I wanted to pull the string on that. Like, when do you bring, the small CPA firm probably doesn't have the bandwidth or skill to understand the state tax credits. And so when do you bring them in? How do you have those conversations? How do you make it so everybody's working together and they're not fighting each other?
Robert, that's a great question and a fantastic point. So I will tell you from my side, I always find that we are going to have the most successful, effective, and efficient process if our CPA or the CPA of the organization we're working with gets involved as early in the process as possible, often during the decision-making process. And I think that it's crucial, because in order for us to be successful, that ultimately has to get attached to the organization's income tax return, right? And so if a CPA is not on board with what we are pursuing to do for them, and if we're not having the conversation of, of what are some of the ancillary fact patterns of the organization that may impact our ability to do the return, or the calculation method of the credit analysis. It's very important that we get involved very early on. So to your point, what we find is that there are a lot of CPAs out there that may have some type of in-house tax credit practice. I'll say for some of our smaller firms, like the one that you worked with, it's much more rare. When we're talking, Big Four, Big 10, some of our larger regional firms, they may have more specialty involved. And I'll tell you, ADP even frequently partners with them as well. You mentioned bandwidth. We're seeing it more and more in the CPA world that they have enough on their plates. They have enough that they are trying to keep up with, and doing some type of specialty credit isn't something that they have the time or ability to allocate, their own resources to. And so when we come in as a partner, we work very diligently to make sure that we are making this a good process. And we're also consulting with them on their preferences and their timeline, right? One of the most important questions we're always asking is there an intention to file on time, or are we looking at an extension on our filing? And when do we need to be able to set clear expectations for the production timeline and ultimately the deliverable? So we have most of our clients are bringing in their CPAs actually on the front end through the analysis and the decision-making process to decide if this is going to be something worth the organization pursuing.
Timeline question. If it's not a statutory, but a negotiated tax credit, state tax credit, what's an appropriate time to properly negotiate those state credit, maybe to figure out what you might do, and then when to be reaching out to different states? Like what kind of amount of months, maybe years, I don't know, if you're working on a big project. And then talk to me about threshold. Like, hey, Robert, we're not talking, it can be quick if it's 10 jobs, but if you're talking 100, you're talking 1,000, you're talking 10,000, trying to get the scale of the timeline.
Yeah, so I think when we're talking negotiated incentives is going to be more related to kind of an economic development services, and scale wise, I mean, we're talking typically our larger, more enterprise organizations that are going to be setting up. We see some of these meta plants that are going in with lots of suppliers sitting around them. Those are the kinds of things when states start negotiating, because that's when we start getting into things like, land grants and tax abatements and all of that, to make a state more attractive than another. To your point, depending on the project itself, we could be talking 6 months, we could be talking, an even shorter timeline, but often we are talking, we can be talking as extensive as years. For some of these applicable state programs where the state program exists, but we're looking to be able to have permission to claim them, typically we're looking at a timeline, anywhere between 3 to 6 months. We have to give the state time to review the project or review the intent, and come back to us with the either approval or disapproval of that. For the states that are statutory, I mean, sometimes we have to file a notice of intent. Sometimes we have to do things like that. But that does happen more quickly. So I think application process, I think a very average timeline, maybe 6 months. For the statutory states, much shorter. I'd say, give ourselves, 1 to 3. And then for the negotiated incentives, I think a 6-month to 9-month timeline would be on the short end.
You mentioned Georgia was on the strong side of these negotiated state tax credits. Any states kind of on the boy, they're not even trying list, not as strong?
Absolutely. There are, there's a couple of things that play into that, right? So, we have states that are going to be much more stringent. For example, California is one of them. There's much more stringent because they are, the economic development is there, right? And they may not necessarily be trying to attract much more, much larger organizations. There are going to be states who are much more geared towards incentives like the workforce training, things of that nature. But then there's also going to be states that are, really focused on their, agricultural and maintaining land, which to that point, we've all seen Yellowstone, right? But to that point, we're not, there's not going to be as many tax credits or incentives that are available because the economic development portion may not be at the forefront of priority for that state. And that is, and, I hate to say it, but these kind of conversations are, it's going to vary based on what your business is, what the priorities are, and what the priorities of the state is.
Any of these state tax credits have a fixed pool that's available, and so there's a timeliness that's necessary to maybe when the funding comes, you got to be really early.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the answer is yes. Most of the states have certain programs that have a fixed pool. Some of these states, or some of these, like the job credits, investment credits, for the most part, it's not going to be that way. But we do see states, Alabama, Mississippi, those are going to be much more closely related to the state grant programs that are available. So grant programs are very different than tax credit programs. So anytime we're looking at a grant, you can pretty much assume that there's going to be a fixed pool there. Credit, because they are, they're going to be directly related to an offset of liability. Those are much more likely to be fixed pool programs.
Well, this has been awesome. I had literally no idea that ADP did this before Bill connected us. Maggie, Lynn, thank you so much. This was great. As I said, I've been the CFO of a very small company with a small CPA firm that was awesome, and they absolutely didn't have any idea what was available. And I remember bringing to the attention of the owners the some like alternative fuel tax credits, and propane counted at the time, and maybe still does, and job tax credits for the state that we were in. We were fast growing and hiring people, and we qualified for tax credits in excess of my salary and bonus. And I made that very clear to the owner when my bonus was around. So it was an easy win, and the CPA was awesome, but they just don't know this stuff. So this is cool that ADP can be another resource, and appreciate this. This is a lot to understand. R&D tax credit, job tax credits, investment, worker training, blah, 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 blah. Every state's different. So it's nice to have Lynn and Maggie to phone a friend. And also, if you're thinking, wow, my banker doesn't connect me to anybody awesome like this. Well, you need a banker like Bill. Bill knows everybody. He may, may be able to get you discounted tickets to Disneyland or Disney World. That could be a thing, Disneyland.com/Bill could. I'm going to look into that. And so thank you, Bill, and God bless everybody for surviving, at least in the Southeast where I am right now, Snowmageddon. I've got family that got half an inch of snow, and school shut down. They're not sure if they'll ever get food or water again. So God, be praying for those that got a half an inch of snow in the Southeast. And thank you all. I hope everybody has a really great day. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you, Robert. I appreciate it.